Right, in this diagram what I want to be looking at is the impacts of taxes and subsidies on markets. Now, we'll take taxes first of all. What we're going to be looking at are the impact of indirect taxes. So, indirect taxes is a tax on expenditure. It's basically a tax on goods and services that we buy. A direct tax will be a tax on incomes, and that's not something we were looking at in this topic. So indirect tax is a tax on expenditure. In other words, the things that you buy. Okay, so best examples will be things like VAT, so value added tax, but you also have excise duties, so taxes that might apply to things like cigarettes or alcohol or petrol, for example. And what these will do is to bump up the market equilibrium price. Why do governments tax things? Well, it could simply be to raise money, to pay for things like healthcare, education. So a good example is in London, there's a congestion charge where you pay to travel into central London every day. It's a tax basically, and the money raised is used to fund development of public transport in London. Taxes could also be placed on goods and services to try and stop people buying them. The London congestion charge, in other ways, stopping people from wanting to drive into London. A tax on cigarettes will make them more expensive, which could make people want to smoke less. Same for alcohol, same for petrol to a certain extent as well. What you've got to be aware of for the exam are two different types. We have an ad valorem tax, and we have a specific tax. So the best way to think about this is in two market equilibrium diagrams. So what we'll do is draw a couple of equilibrium points. So we've got P1, Q1, and we've got the same thing over here, P1, Q1. Now specific is probably the easiest one to get your head around. Remember what a tax is, an indirect tax, is where we tax the firm. We place an additional cost on firms which will make them want to produce less. This will lead to supply moving inwards, which means market prices grow and people buy less. Now, what this vertical distance is, it's the tax per unit. Okay, now all a specific tax is, it's a specific amount of money that's applied to every good or service. It could be, for example, we say to a firm, for every one of these products you sell, you've got to pay 20p tax or 30p tax. So what you should have is this parallel shift. Wherever you go along the new supply curve, the cost is exactly the same amount higher. Okay, so every unit of output will generate the same additional cost. Now for an ad valorem tax, what we're looking at is a percentage tax. Okay, so when you sell things at a low price, the percentage will generate quite a small increase in cost. So for example, if something's £1 and you've got a 20p tax, sorry, a 20% tax, the price the cost will be 20p higher. But if the price was, let's say, £1,000 at a much bigger supply, then ultimately 20% of £1,000 will be £200 cost. So what you get is this, and you get this kind of cone shape. So the impact on the market is the same. Prices grow, and the market will get smaller. So again, what you've got here is the tax per unit. But what you'll notice is at the top of the supply curve here, I've got this big increase in costs. Down here, it's a very small increase in costs. It's the same percentage, but at low prices, it's a much lower cost than what it would be at much higher prices up here. Right, now what you've got to be able to do in the exam as well is to think about the incidence of tax. Okay, now all the incidence of tax is looking at is who pays the tax. Is it the consumer or producer? Or what percentage is paid by both? Right, so what we do, let's start off with a normal, well, a unitary demand curve if you like. So we have this. So we have this market price and quantity. Now, one thing that you need to be aware of is that that rectangle will show me the revenue the firm earns. So P1, let's call that A, Q1, B. That big rectangle is the revenue that the firm earns. If we were to put a specific tax in place, remember the vertical distance is the tax per unit. So what it will do, it will force up the market price to P2 and lower the size of the market to Q2. Right, now the revenue for the firm now will be P2 C Q2 B. It's that rectangle there in effect. Now to work out how much tax is paid, what we do, I'll use a different colour pen to make it stand out for a start. We start at the new market equilibrium point. Okay, now when you think about it, then this is the tax per unit. That is how much tax the firm has got to pay on every one that they sell. And the firm has sold Q2 all the way to 0. So this is sales, if you like. And if you multiply these two sides together, what you get is this area here, which will show me the amount of tax revenue that is generated. Then what you get in that box is, well, it's a rectangle divided up in two when you look at it. You get this. Okay, now the top half is the tax paid by the consumer. So when you think about it, the price has increased from P1 to P2. That's the proportion of the tax that's been passed on to the consumer. The bottom bit is the bit the producer must be absorbing, paying themselves. So they haven't passed the full price increase or the full tax onto the customer. So they must be prepared to pay some of it themselves. Let's think about how elasticity will affect this. So let's have a very price inelastic demand, and let's have a very elastic demand. And again, what we'll do, we'll show the impact of a specific tax. So what this will do, it will, in both markets, raise the market price, and it will lower the size of the market. But hopefully what you remember about this stuff from previous topics is that when you've got inelastic demand, then you'll have a very small fall in demand as prices increase. Elastic, you have this big drop in demand. And again, remember the vertical distance between the supply curves is the tax per unit. Remember, this is a specific tax. We've got this parallel shift. Okay, now again, what you've got to do, you've got to work out, well, what's the tax revenue first of all. Original equilibrium point all the way down to the original supply, that's your tax per unit. All the way across back to this axis here will show me the sales. And we get this tax revenue box here. Over here, same thing. Equilibrium point all the way down to the original supply. And we get this tax box here. And what you've hopefully seen is that when demand is inelastic, the consumer will pay the bulk of the tax. The producer will pay a very small amount of it. Elastic, the consumer will pay a smaller proportion than what the producer will. Well, think about why. When demand's inelastic, firms feel comfortable raising prices and they will pass the tax on to the consumer because they know ultimately it will not really affect demand. When you think about something like cigarettes and addiction, the people are going to be very price inelastic funds. When the government starts to raise tax on cigarettes, when they say we're doing it to try and lower demand, well, you would argue, well, is that really useful? Is that really solving the problem? Because ultimately people will still buy a very similar quantity of cigarettes. When demand's elastic, you can see the tax is more effective at lowering demand. Okay, so overall, is it a good tax or not? Well, it depends on the purpose of the tax. If we're looking to raise taxes to pay for things, well, no problem at all. But if we're looking to use taxes to alter people's demand, it will only work if demand is elastic. Then you will have this huge drop in demand, but if it's inelastic demand, people will still keep buying.